Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to interCHANGE. What a fascinating week it has been for political junkies. We'll talk about the race for Wisconsin Supreme Court and how it might be weeks until we can confirm the winner. We'll talk about Milwaukee's new county executive. He'll replace Scott Walker and is expected to be about as different from Scott Walker as one could possibly expect. And do you think it's too easy and too early to talk about who might run for president? We'll talk about the early favorites to take on Barack Obama. All right, let's introduce the panel. It's always a pleasure to have newspaper columnist Joel McNally with us. Kevin Fischer, longtime broadcaster, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over at WISN Radio.
Sometimes it's a pleasure, sometimes.
Denise Callaway, the coordinator of business and community partnerships for the Milwaukee Public School System. And Gerard Randall, consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. Let's talk first about the state Supreme Court race between Prosser and Kloppenburg. First, it looks like Kloppenburg wins by a few hundred votes out of 1.5 million cast. Now it looks like Prosser's ahead by thousands after it's discovered that the votes from Brookfield were never properly counted. You have to admit there's enough fodder to go around for conspiracy theorists on both sides. What a crazy week.
It's been a wild week, and it's been a good week for political junkies, and depending on who you voted for, it's been a good week or a sour week. I think all of this, though, has pointed to several things. First, I'm wondering who the next group of angry voters are going to be that will juice up turnout in the next group of large elections coming in 2012. You've got, in this election, you had the response to Governor Walker's budget and some of the elements within that budget, his fight with the unions. That certainly prompted the opportunity, if not downright change, certainly in Milwaukee County and in Dane County. You've had the mantra to kill Scott Walker, so to speak, politically, that led to an effort to unseat Supreme Court justice, a sitting justice that up until that time didn't appear to be in much trouble with his reelection. So when you start to move into next year's spring elections, what's going to motivate these voters to come out? Will there still be the same kind of ambition and effort to put candidates in place that will either be supportive of Walker, supportive of President Obama, or will there be a lot of anti-whomever sentiment that's enough to drive people to the polls to either unseat the president or, in the case that some would like, unseat a governor?
Denise, even if you buy the explanation from the Waukesha County clerk that it was human error, it still blows your mind that in this day and age, with all the technology we have, that something like this can even happen.
Well, it is incredible, and you do have to make that assumption or perhaps wonder whether or not it's actually correct. I mean, here's a person who, has a couple of things that kind of lend to the conspiracy theory or certainly make you at least wonder. This is an individual who, for 2 years, worked for Judge Prosser when he was head of the assembly and she worked for the GOP caucus, so that he was her boss for 2 years. She was involved in the caucus scandal and was granted immunity, wasn't prosecuted, but was granted immunity. Her office, from the time that she was elected in 2002, has been criticized as recently as last year when there was an audit that was done by Waukesha County. One of the things they criticized her for was her lack of security, her lack of process. To have someone who, when she worked for the justice, who was a data entry and computer expert, to say that I forgot to hit the save button and that's where the votes didn't count. At the very worst case scenario, for those who are conspiracy theorists, it's awfully shady. The best case scenario, and I don't think this is a very good best case scenario, is that she's incredibly inept at her job. In either case, it has once again caused there to be questions and concerns about whether or not in a close election the votes are correct or the votes are right. Some people have called her the Kathleen Harris of Wisconsin, referring back to the Secretary of State in the 2000 presidential election in Florida. I don't know that that's correct, but clearly, to be this careless, at best case scenario, to be this careless with the votes of citizens is just unconscionable.
Kevin, did you work with this woman in Waukesha? Do you know her?
I think I had a phone conversation with her about something totally unrelated many years.
Recently?
No, many years ago, and so I do know of her reputation, and up until some of these things happened, it wasn't a bad reputation. Now, I will say that what she did was uncalled for and inexcusable, but she went in front of live TV cameras and said what she said. She went through a living hell, and she wouldn't have done that unless she was telling the truth. I think you have to make the distinction here that this is not a ballot issue. These are all legitimate votes. This is a reporting issue, and as such, there's no fraud here. She made a clerical error. She made a mistake. She admitted that.
If she'll face re-election.
And she will have to go to the voters now,
right,
and they will decide her fate. Now, I understand
Hopefully
some of the
she'll do a better job of counting those ballots.
Well, I understand the consternation of the left, who have been screaming for years and years that there is no voter fraud in the state of Wisconsin. Well, okay, it does look a little shady, but again, it's not a ballot issue, it's a reporting issue. Those are legitimate votes that simply were not reported.
Right.
And now they have been. This is why they call the results, and we've all been in the news business for a whole lot of years, and this is why they call them, on election night, unofficial results. And even the press didn't see it that night. They didn't see it the next morning. And this is why you have the canvas that goes over it and over it and over it. And might I add that you had the Democratic Party member of the canvassing group in Waukesha County. She was there for the entire time, for the entire process, and she says that once they started that canvass, everything was done right, and the numbers add up. So I think we're going to see it. This is going to be drawn out for a long time. In the world of Joanne Kloppenburg, if you win by 250, you rush to the cameras and you proclaim victory. But when you lose by 7,500, well, that's too razor-thin a margin. We may have to have a recount. And this will drag out, but I think in the end, Justice Prosser will be the winner.
I take it you don't buy the argument that
No,
we should dismiss the fact that there was any fraud involved.
No, we can't dismiss that at all. How could you? I mean, first of all, from the very beginning, the Republicans have damaged their credibility totally since Scott Walker has been governor of this state. We had the legislature passing a very controversial bill in what was apparently an illegal meeting that violated the open meetings law. Then when a judge called them out for violating the law and issued an injunction to stop the implementation of the law, the Republicans went ahead and started implementing it anyway. Then she called another hearing and ordered the state not to implement the law and said, well, you know, what part of a court order doesn't the state of Wisconsin's Republican leadership not understand? And the Republican Attorney General of this state still issued an opinion saying this judge had no right to issue an order out of her own court. So they have shown total disregard for the law. The Waukesha surprise of finding 14,000 votes 2 days after the election, after we get what we are told are the final results from every precinct reporting, out of Waukesha County, the most Republican county of this state. Gerard said something about who's going to be angry and continue to be angry. Let me tell you, people who saw the election results and then Waukesha surprise totally turns around the election results, you bet that they're going to still be angry. You bet that they're going to feel that there was really some manipulation here. And if you look at the results all over the state, look what happened compared to the Scott Walker election to this election. There were 19 counties in this state that voted for Scott Walker that went for Joanne Kloppenburg. That was the effect of this Walker governorship. And while this wave swept across the state, some other wave came out of Wisconsin, Waukesha County. Can you imagine what the reaction of Kevin and the right-wing radio stations would have been if the city of Milwaukee had discovered 7,500 votes for Joanne Kloppenburg?
We did react the way you were reacting here tonight. You're apoplectic. And years ago, when Milwaukee County had 10,000 more votes than registered voters, we brought up voter fraud here, and we were laughed at.
You have made
no, there's no voter fraud.
Yeah,
that's a clerical error, is what we were told.
Investigated
and this
by the
too was a clerical error.
The U.S. attorney, and they said there was no voter fraud. And you're still claiming
by the way, you said that they found these votes.
Now that you found
these votes as if they found them in a trunk. No, the votes were always there. They were never reported, and they didn't swing anything. They were always there, and they needed to be counted.
Waukesha County would have reported as many possible votes as it could for David Prosser.
Waukesha County gets out and votes.
First time.
Waukesha County gets out and votes pretty hard, and before these votes were discovered in the canvass, they had like 36% turnout when the rest of the state was going 40 to 50%.
It would have prompted a re-examination of those votes.
You can't have zero voters in the city of Brookfield. That's called disenfranchisement.
All right, let's switch to Milwaukee County for just a few minutes. The Milwaukee County executive race. Philanthropist Chris Abele crushed Republican lawmaker Jeff Stone. Did Abele win because so many folks thought he'd make a great Milwaukee County executive, or did Abele win because so many people who don't like Scott Walker turned out to vote in Milwaukee County?
Yes and yes. I think clearly that there was concern about people in Milwaukee County about what kind of county executive we wanted to have. Did we want to have someone who was going to do more of the same, which is what Jeff Stone was really talking about doing? Or did we want someone who had a vision for Milwaukee County, someone who actually, through the work that he's done throughout his entire lifetime, and certainly during the time he's been here in Milwaukee, which has been focused on finding creative solutions to problems, not passing them down the road or not just cutting it because we can't figure out a way to pay for it with our normal way of thinking. I think what people wanted was the latter. They wanted someone who was going to take a look at the problems that we had and come up with creative ways to address those issues. And I think that's why people voted for Chris Abele. Now, I certainly expect to hear in just a few minutes the idea that Chris Abele spent 4 times as much money as he did. But if you take a look at the outside money that came in, the outside money that was spent to support Jeff Stone was almost 4 to 1 in comparison to the outside money that came in to support Chris Abele.
But this is also a county that, when it had the opportunity to vote for Scott Walker when he was running for county executive, voted for him heavy duty and loved him. So,
but they didn't vote for him.
But they didn't vote for him for governor.
I have a different take on what may have led, what did lead.
Would any Republican have lost?
Yes, any Republican would have lost, which is why I think there were Republican candidates like David Clark that reconsidered an entry into the race.
I thought Dave Clark said he was a Democrat.
Yeah. Says he is.
Maybe the truth is
that's a segment for another show.
He can speak for himself, but I'd like to think of him as one of us.
He's always run as a Democrat.
You just have to use the word conservative.
The reality is that the unions really showed their strength, particularly in the city of Milwaukee. They were angry. They generated a very strong turnout, particularly in the African American community, where there hadn't been a whole lot of connection to Chris Abele until he got out. He did make a lot of campaign stops in the central city. He received a lot of support from folk like Gwen Moore. Reverend Jesse Jackson made multiple trips into the city to help him and Joanne Kloppenburg. So I think those things made the difference in terms of getting a North Side vote that produced for him, gave him the margin that he needed to win, in a substantial margin.
It's not a news bulletin, guys. Milwaukee County is it's a Democratic stronghold. It was a news story when Scott Walker won it. And I think to compare Scott Walker to Jeff Stone, well, if that's the case, well, then Jeff Stone would have just used the same winning formula that Scott Walker did to win office in a Democratic stronghold. Jeff Stone, what you see is what you get. He's a mild-mannered, soft-spoken guy. He didn't run a very strong or aggressive campaign, I thought. And in the end, all the Dan Bice articles about a guy who can't, chew gum and walk at the same time, it didn't matter to the voters. You're a crook, we'll put you in. You're a millionaire that doesn't pay your parking tickets, we'll vote for you.
Paid 'em.
The Democrats are always moaning about, it's only the rich and the privileged that get into office and have power, and yet they keep putting these people in power. But in the end, I thought this was not really a major surprise, because you have in Milwaukee County, technically, pretty much votes for Democrats. Scott Walker was the anomaly.
There have been local elections where we've sat here and we've said, well, this guy did so well or this woman did so well because conservative talk radio, Sykes and Belling love them and they pushed them and pushed them. Does this election show that maybe talk radio doesn't have the impact that we all think it has?
I don't know that talk radio had much of an impact in that race. I mean, actually, Gerard was right. There was such a wave of revulsion against Scott Walker and what was going on in Madison that in Milwaukee County you expected a strong turnout from people who were revolted by that. I don't want to name any names, but someone did say off the air that the Waukesha County clerk had found 120,000 votes for Jeff Stone, and that's going to be the next.
Oh,
news.
wonderful!
I want to count it.
Let's hear more about it. It's
But
great
I really believe that in the case of Chris Abele, he is a solid guy. I mean, take the partisanship out of it. Take the partisanship out of it in a minute, Kevin. Let's talk about an intelligent, problem-solving person who has been committed to the issues of this city.
Gives away money. That's what he does.
Gives away money.
And I fear that's what he's going to do now as county executive.
To try to solve the worst problems facing all of us. Look at the job he ran for. It is a horrible job that Scott Walker left in a shambles. And millionaires don't usually buy horrible jobs that are going to be extremely difficult. The only reason for Chris Abele to run for county executive was to show that you could bring intelligent solutions to these horrible political problems.
Now, whether the solutions are,
the truth of the matter is, intelligence is not terribly respected in politics. We've had Dave Schultz, who I've said before was county executive, and he thought he was the smartest guy in the county.
In the room, and he probably was.
And that's exactly right. And he was not terribly successful because of that, because he didn't know how to work the politics.
Well, you're comparing Dave Schultz to the Milwaukee County Board at that time.
Is Abele still going to want this job?
It depends. He's got 1 year to demonstrate that he can have a working relationship with a county board that is made up of a lot of folk who actually know the county. They know the county's issues. They know where bones are buried. So he's going to have to put together a solid administration that will come in and be respected by this county board.
That's true.
So
and he doesn't have that now. He has to replace a whole bunch of managers and department heads. And that county board
have to replace them because they're horrible.
And that county board you talked about is empowered now. They could go nowhere with Scott Walker. Now they're going to feel that they've got this new guy. His next budget is going to be critical.
He is a leader. He really is a leader. And let's see now what a non-political person can do to solve these problems.
Well, and I think it's a very different
situation. But I'm not real optimistic.
It's a very different situation, because when you listen to what Chris Abele has to say about the relationship he wants to have with the county board, first thing he says is he wants to have a relationship with them. He doesn't want to tell them, this is what I'm going to do, and in essence, you can do whatever you want. I'm county executive. If I want to, I'll veto it. He wants to have a working relationship with the county board to solve the issues that face this community, which are very serious. That's already a plus for him.
We'll keep talking politics. It's not too early to talk about presidential politics, because Barack Obama has officially announced that he is running for a second term. So let's talk for a few minutes about who will be the likely Republicans to take him on. Right now, there's a poll out, came out this week, that said Mitt Romney is at the top. He's at the top of the list. And who comes in second? Donald Trump. Oh, man.
That's why you can take polls and,
I don't think either of them will be the candidate. I think the party will look more closely at some of the Republican governors, Pawlenty out of Minnesota, Daniels out of Indiana, or out of New Jersey, Christie.
Although he says he doesn't want it.
Well, they could all say they don't want it, and then money starts to fly their way, encouraging them to at least test the waters. And I think you get a different response the closer you get to primary time. So I'm expecting that those candidates that were in the mix the last go round are not going to get much traction. Romney still has to overcome his Mormon faith background. He's also going to have to deal with what has angered many on the conservative end of the party, and that's the Massachusetts Care program that he put in place that some are saying doesn't work very well. Some certainly have seen it as an example of what Obamacare will look like, and it's just not going to be good for him among the party faithful who tend to come out.
I agree. I don't think it's anyone that's been named right now. Tim Pawlenty and Herman Cain have developed some sort of exploratory committees. To a lesser degree, Donald Trump.
He's got to wait for The Apprentice to be over. That's his thing.
Well, Donald Trump,
important.
Forget it. I mean, it makes for good copy for a couple of days.
For Donald Trump.
And Newt Gingrich, forget it. I think it's someone that's going to come out of the fray in another year or so. And then when in typical Republican fashion, once they pick their person and they pick them early, that will be the person they ride right through the campaign, right through the conventions.
Who's the Republican you think that the Democrats worry about most often?
I don't know, because I look at those lists of Republicans, and they all are deeply flawed candidates. And you intentionally haven't even mentioned some of the biggest names in your party, Sarah Palin and Michelle Bachmann, absurd people who are running for president, just like Donald Trump's an absurd person. The remarkable thing from what we just heard, to me, is that actually the biggest rap on Mitt Romney is that he actually tried to do something to provide health care to people.
When you can't afford it.
And they're absolutely right that, it is the system that Barack Obama put in place nationally that is going to save the health care system in this country. And instead of taking credit for it, he now has to run away from it because his party is against providing health care to people. And that is so bizarre to me. The Republican Party has moved so far to the right that if someone actually does something worthwhile, it's considered a deficit.
What about Paul Ryan, who says he doesn't want to be considered, but a lot of people are pushing him right now?
I think if Paul Ryan's going to move his way up, I think he's going to take a look at a run for U.S. Senate when Cole's up for re-election. I think the Republicans face a fundamental problem as they're taking a look at a candidate. And the problem for them is they're not going to be able to have one candidate because you have the influence of the Tea Party, which we certainly are seeing in these debates and discussions about whether or not we're going to shut down the government by the time this airs on Sunday, whether or not our government's going to be shut down. The Tea Party has its what some people would say are extreme ideas that are not in the mainstream of the Republican Party. So I think the Republican Party's biggest problem is going to be the Tea Party. Is the Tea Party going to launch its own candidate like Michelle Bachmann? Then you potentially have the Tea Party having its own presidential candidate and the Republican Party having another candidate, and what's going to happen then is good for Democrats and good
democracy,
for the country.
What a concept.
Well, but it's going to have, if that happens, it's going to have a huge impact on the Republican Party.
More interesting candidates as opposed to just one.
The death of your party.
All right, let's stay in the nation's capital just a bit longer. As we tape this program late on Friday afternoon, congressional leaders are only hours away from a deadline and a result they say they're trying to avoid. Of course, that isn't the only thing they're trying to avoid, and Rick Horowitz is getting right in the spirit of things. Rick.
Not my fault. Don't blame me. The shutdown, I mean. If there's a government shutdown and everything comes to a crashing halt, the phones don't get answered and the parks are closed and the forms don't get processed and the checks don't go out, it's not my fault. I'm glad we could clear that up because even more than I don't want our political leaders in Washington at each other's throats and the lights going out and important services suddenly going missing, the last thing I want is to be blamed for even a tiny little bit of it. It wouldn't be fair, but why take the chance that somebody might misunderstand my role or worse yet, deliberately distort it for partisan advantage. See, I was in Washington earlier this week, but certainly not to stir up trouble. In fact, I was hoping that cooler heads would prevail, assuming there are any cooler heads still left in Washington. And personally, I was willing to go the extra mile, particularly when I got off at the wrong metro stop that one time. But I can't say I actually saw anyone step back from the abyss. Of course, if I'm wrong about that, and if my being there somehow helped to avert the crisis, then naturally I'll be happy to take whatever credit I can, but not the blame, definitely not the blame. See, I'm not the one who made promises to my constituents I had no way of making happen. I certainly wasn't the one promising them that I'd never compromise on anything important when they thought everything was important. I'm not the one who didn't do the math. If there are a few dozen of us who've committed to doing X, but there are just as many dozens on the other side who've committed to not doing X, then the most likely result isn't going to be either X or not X, but something in between. And letting the constituents think otherwise, letting them think they could get everything they wanted, and if it took a shutdown to get there, you were fine with a shutdown, that wasn't me either. So we're clear about that? Any questions? Good, because it might get really ugly over the next few days, and in all the excitement, you might forget things. Here's the only thing you need to remember: not my fault.
Thanks, Rick, and thank you so much for watching. Stay warm. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You say you haven't been the same since you